UFP, the United Federation of Podcasts.
Welcome to Franchise Fatigue, the United Federation of Podcasts little podcast devoted to exploring all the wonderful films and sequels and remakes in a movie franchise series. I am one of your nerdy hosts, Brandon-Shea, and joining me, as he always is, the Godfather himself, Zach Moore.
Hey, Brandon, how's it going?
I'm doing really good, Godfather.
Zach, I'm honored and grateful that you have invited me to your broadcast. Brandon and Zach, I am grateful and honored to invite you. Brandon,
we've got ourselves a special guest, Zach. I don't know. I know that it wasn't on the list, but you know, I kind of felt that we needed to invite somebody here and discuss this film with us. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, it sounds good to me.
That you have invited
Okay,
me.
excellent. Well, let me go bring him in here. He's a good guy. Here we go. Luca Tribuzio. How's it going?
Brandon and Zach, I am honored and grateful that you have invited me to your podcast on the day of your podcast. And I hope that your podcast be a fruitful podcast. I pledge my ever-ending listening.
Excellent. Well, we really appreciate it. You're our most loyal listener, and we couldn't think of anybody else besides you to have you on. You know,
loyal listener
Italian.
Of 2 listeners in Las Vegas. Is that what we're going with still?
Amy's given up on us, so we don't even have Amy anymore. She messaged us. She's like, "You're doing horror movies. You're doing movies I haven't seen. I'm out."
She's not part of the family anymore. I don't want to see her. I don't want to talk to her. If I'm going to show up, I want to know an hour in advance, so she's not there.
Amy Nelson sleeps with the fishes.
I have a feeling we're going to have a lot of these quips going on in this podcast. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yes. Well, in case the listeners can't tell what we're talking about today, we're going to be talking about Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Yes. Part 1.
No, I'm just kidding.
We're
talking about the Best Picture winner from, what was this, 1972, The Godfather?
That's
73,
correct.
sir. Or is it
73?
Yeah, 72.
Oh,
72.
Okay.
Way before I was born. I was -9 when this movie came out, but it's a masterpiece nonetheless. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. And no, I know I said it earlier, but the only reason we called you is not because you're Italian.
It's because I lived in both New York and I live in Vegas. Is that why?
Yes, you have a unique perspective on both. I do kind of actually have a question for you on this. You know, in this day and age when we got movies that have like stereotypes and stuff, as an Italian, how do you feel seeing a movie that portrays Italians as like gangsters and crime lords? Is that a trope? Is it okay? Is it like, you know what, it's not so culturally appropriate anymore? What do you think?
I'm glad you brought this up because I actually thought about bringing this on the podcast. It's funny because when the series The Sopranos came on the air, it was under a lot of scrutiny by the Italian American community, especially based in New Jersey. Saying is how it depicted Italian Americans in the wrong light. And to me, when that came out, the first thing I said was, look at The Godfather. Okay, in the film, you have domestic violence. In the film, you have murder. But on the flip side, if you look at it, the mafia does not kill innocents. They have rules. And back then, it was there was no drugs to be involved. They didn't want it to influence the children and stuff like that. So I'm very glad you brought that up, and that's what I wanted to say first and foremost. Is it a trope? Is it tiresome that because your name ends in a vowel, automatically you belong to a mafia? To be honest, no. And even if you were to ask me, you know, hey, are you in the mob? It's not like I wear a name tag. as this, hi, my name's Chrissy No-Nose. I belong to X family. You'll never know. And that's the thing.
So, unlike Section 31, you guys don't wear badges?
No, we don't. We don't wear badges, no.
Okay, just wanted to clarify.
But you knew who we were, but you never, you knew who we were, but you never asked. You never asked the question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did want to ask you that when we knew we were having you on. You actually reached out to us when we had mentioned that we were going to be covering this. You said you wanted to join us, and I'm like, well, sure, let's get you on. And I kind of conditionally made you say that you got to be on for all three, and we're still trying to work out our time slot for to see if we can get you on for Godfather 3 or not. But we're definitely going to have you on next time for Godfather 2. But I've been really looking forward to watching these films, and that is something that I've thought about. I mean, like I'm Ukrainian ancestry, and there's no Ukrainian movies out there, right? Like, so I don't see any cultural stereotypes for my background out there in the media, right? But so I just was kind of curious as to that and to what your aspect and your thought is. Without getting too much into the discussion, and I'm just going to touch on it now and we'll save it for later. I mean, one of the things that I really do like about the beginning of this film is how much of the culture it shows, like this wonderful wedding and stuff, and it shows it's a lot of fun and there's a lot of interesting culture and the singing and stuff like that. So I think Coppola did a very good job of showing the book and the mafia type there, but he did also a very good job of showing the Italian culture. I believe that's at least how I view the movie. So thanks so much for joining us today, Zach. Why don't, before we get too in depth into the movie, take it away with your trivia, because I know there's probably lots for this movie.
Yeah, this is one of the most well-documented films of all time, so there's so much trivia. So buckle your seatbelts. We're not going to say every last bit of trivia because we'd be here all night, but there is quite a bit, which is quite fascinating, I think, leading into the movie. So Paramount, they bought the rights to The Godfather before the book was even finished from Mario Puzo. It was only a 20-page outline, and they saw, there's success here. There's potential here. Let's buy it. So it was going to be made into a film from before it was even finished as a novel. And of course, it's based off a novel by Mario Puzo, and it's called Mario Puzo's The Godfather. You see that in the opening title screen. And Paramount originally wanted to scrap that. Wanted to scrap the Mario Puzo. Wanted to scrap the artist rendering of the puppet master hands there. Which when I was younger, I was a kid. I was like, what is that? But yes, it's like a puppet master, and all ties together because lines of dialogue later in the movie reflect that. But Francis Ford Coppola, he stuck to his guns on that because Mario Puzo actually, wrote the screenplay as well with Coppola, and he felt like it would be appropriate to call it Mario Puzo's The Godfather. So that's why it stayed labeled as such in the film. Now, there were a lot of directors who were potentially going to direct The Godfather. Sergio Leone was approached to direct the film, but he turned it down because he felt like it glorified the mafia. But he ended up regretting this and actually went on to make Once Upon a Time in America about a decade later. There were a list of other directors: Sidney J. Furie, who I know from Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. He was in line to direct as well. But it ended up being Coppola because his Italian heritage really won the day for him here because he had that unique insight into it. And one of the reasons Coppola finally agreed to direct the film was because he was in debt to Warner Brothers, because him and George Lucas went $400,000 over budget for THX 1138, and Lucas told him, like, hey, Francis, you better take this money. We need to pay Warner Brothers. So that's a big reason he took it. But also, he was a little hesitant at first because he thought it glorified the mafia and violence, but he took the job thinking he could make it more about America, the American dream, capitalism, all those sorts of things, and that's the kind of angle he took, and who better to approach it than being Italian in heritage himself. So Paramount, their original idea was to make it a low-budget gangster film set in contemporary times, like the 70s, which is funny because, again, I mentioned when I was younger, like, I didn't realize The Godfather was a period piece for a few years until I finally saw it. You watch it like, oh, well, this is an old movie. No, it's even older than it is in the film and the narrative. And Coppola rejected the original script that Puzo actually wrote, reflecting like a 1970s-esque one, and they went back to the book itself into the 40s and the 50s. And Coppola, he was always fighting the studio through all this. You hear about these great films of all time: Star Wars with Lucas, Jaws with Spielberg. Godfather than Coppola, right? He was fighting Paramount. They tried to have him replaced. They were saying he was going to be over schedule and he was making unnecessary expenses, but he actually completed the film ahead of schedule and under budget. So despite all the drama going on behind the scenes, it all turned out for the best, as we all know. But it's interesting that you hear about director's cuts, like the initial cuts that directors turn into studios, and they're usually a lot longer than the theatrical cuts. But actually, Coppola, he turned in an initial cut, a director's cut that ran 2 hours and 6 minutes, which is crazy to think about how much would have been lost. And the production chief of Paramount Pictures rejected it, and he demanded a longer cut with more scenes about the family and just fleshing everything out. So Coppola did that and added about 50 minutes to it, which became the theatrical cut. And now, this is something that I always thought. I always thought Henry Mancini did the music for The Godfather, and he was the original choice. But that it was not him. It was Nino Rota did the music for The Godfather. And he actually reused a lot of his score from a 1958 film, Fortunella, which kept him from being nominated for an Oscar for his score, but he was awarded a Grammy. So there was a loophole. He still got it, and a BAFTA award as well for his score in the film, which is beautiful. And then, ironically, he would go on to win an Academy Award for the best score for Godfather Part 2, even though it's pretty much the same score, the same themes that he couldn't use for this one. So, anyway, lots of casting stuff as well. There's such a long list of people who wanted to play Vito Corleone. So Laurence Olivier wanted to play Vito Corleone, but he had failing health and he had to decline. Orson Welles famously really wanted to play Vito Corleone. He said he'd lose the weight, he'd do whatever he wanted to do, but Coppola had his heart set on Marlon Brando, of course. Other people, Ernest Borgnine, Everett G. Robinson, Richard Conte, Anthony Quinn, George C. Scott, they're all considered. Burt Lancaster wanted the role, but he was never considered. And then ultimately they came down to Marlon Brando. And it's just arguably his most iconic role of all time. Mm-hmm. And Brando really put his own stamp on it. He wanted to make Vito look like a bulldog. So in his audition, he famously stuffed his cheeks with wool. Now, he didn't actually do that in the film. They made a special mouthpiece from a dentist they made for him to wear. So he doesn't have cotton balls in his mouth during the Godfather. But that mouthpiece that was worn by Brando, it's on display now in the American Museum of Moving Image in Queens, New York. So you can go actually see it there. And Brando based his performance of Vito off real life mobster Frank Costello. He had seen him on TV during the 50s and imitated his husky whisper for the film. And it really, Brando, being such an iconic, actor, he really does disappear to a certain extent in this role. And but Brando, being the eccentric guy he is, he did not memorize most of his lines, and he read them on cue cards through most of the film. So this guy, greatest actor of all time, because he can read a cue card and make it sound like some amazing soliloquy that he's memorized. And despite the lead billing and winning Best Actor Oscar, Brando's total screen time is less than 1 hour, which, when you consider that the movie is 3 hours long, that's a significant small portion. And one last thing about Brando, on his first day of filming, he missed his plane and he arrived too late, so he skipped that first day. And when they called him back in to do ADR, it was a $12,000 fee for him to do it. So they gave him the $12,000 check, but when he got the check, he called him back and said, "Hey, you guys paid me too much. Remember, I missed that one day. Where can I send you this extra $4,000?" So, a complicated guy, Brando. Very eccentric, very weird, money, all these kinds of things. But, that's just a little fun. The other side, the lighter side of Marlon Brando. So, Coppola's first choices were always Al Pacino, James Caan, Robert Duvall, Diane Keaton. He actually filmed his own unofficial screen test with all these guys at his house in San Francisco. But Paramount was unimpressed by them and insisted that official screen tests be held. The studio spent $420,000 on screen tests, but in the end, they went back to the original group of actors. So way to waste money, guys. Lots of other potential Michael Corleones. Martin Sheen, Dean Stockwell were auditioned. Also David Carradine. But Al Pacino was the choice. He and lots of other people as well. James Caan. There was a lot of like people auditioning for other parts to get all moved around. James Caan auditioned for Michael. He got that part, but then they changed it around. The guy that was going to be the guy was going to play Sonny at that point. Yes, he got moved to a completely other movie. Then James Caan was going to play. He was going to play Tom Hanks.